Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turned out a poem 719. A south wind has a pathos. And right away we'll remind ourselves that we're back to the only other time this word pathos gets used is in 137. And we find ourselves immediately thinking about the notion that Emily likes to think of herself more as a northern gal than a southern gal. We'll have more to say about that. And we can't help but think about the significance of course, Shelley's Ode to the West Wind when we pick up a poem like this as well. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily's our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 718 poems. We just finished with 718. I meant to find her. Now, Emily, as we said, likes to think of herself more as a person of the North. You'll remember from our study of 442. So to Emily, the South is exotic. We saw this in 180 as well as poem 697. And we will see it again here as well. Now, I believe a poem like this helps us read T.S. Eliot's four quartets, Dry Salvages, and we'll maybe finish there. I can hopefully make the connection. Reminding you again, our goal in 303 in our work is always to learn. And how do we define learning? That connecting or relating new information to old information in meaningful and creative ways. We'll see if we can play the game here. She says it this way. A south wind has a pathos of individual voice, as one detect on landings an immigrant's address, a hint of ports and peoples, and much not understood, the fairer for the farness and for the foreignhood. Only Emily could create a word like foreignhood. I mean, it's brilliant, and it's the only time she ever used it. Let's begin, first of all, by just pointing out that the south wind is, for Emily, different from the north wind, which is the north that she knows. And it has a pathos to it, as we said, 137, our only other use of it, of individual voice. I can't help but think that there's an identification with the wind in this poem, and the idea of inspiration, the idea of somehow hearing the important new information, she'll call it foreign. And then she'll use this extended, if you will, simile, which is quite remarkable, as one detect on landings an immigrant's address. In other words, the idea that, okay, we've got this individual who is journeying to a foreign land, and it's always what? Well, it's a hint. I think of poem 696, Acres of Perhaps, a hint of ports and peoples. You can hear the repetition of sounds here. And much not understood, right? In other words, the foreignness of it, the south wind, foreignness, strangeness, the fairer for the farness and for the foreignhood. Again, the repetition of the F sounds is brilliant here as well. I think the point at 2A is that sometimes the foreign is the most attractive, and it's what often will bring to us the inspiration of our work. At 2B, I want to challenge you to think about the possibility that, borrowing from Ode to the West Wind, that we're talking really here about poetic inspiration for Emily, and where some of her most important ideas come from that south wind, the unusual wind, not the north wind that she's accustomed to. Well, I said that we would end with Dry Salvages, and I want to take us back to a study that we've already concluded at learnstrong.net. We've given full lectures on all of the lines of each of the four poems of four quartets. I can't recommend that study enough to you. Some of you will remember and smile as you do so the very idea of Dry Salvages and passage 3. Shall we enjoy it again? I sometimes wonder if that is what Krishna meant, among other things, or one way of putting the same thing, that the future is a faded song, a royal rose or a lavender spray of wistful regret for those who are not here to regret, pressed between yellow leaves of a book that has never been opened. And the way up is the way down, and the way forward is the way back. You cannot face it steadily, but this thing is sure, that time is no healer, the patient is no longer here. When the train starts and the passengers are settled to fruit, periodicals and business letters, and those who saw them off have left the platform, their faces relax from grief into relief to the sleepy rhythm of 100 hours. Fare forward, travelers, not escaping from the past into different lives or into any future, You are not the same people who left that station or who will arrive at any terminus while the narrowing rails slide together behind you. And on the deck of the drumming liner, watching the furrow that widens behind you, you shall not think the past is finished or the future is before us. At nightfall, in the rigging and the aerial is a voice descanting, though not to the ear the murmuring shell of time and not in any language. Fare forward, you who think that you are voyaging. You are not those who saw the harbor receding, or those who will disembark here between the hither and the farther shore while time is withdrawn. Consider the future and the past with an equal mind. At the moment which is not of action or inaction, you can receive this. On whatever sphere of being the mind of a man may be intent at the time of death, that is the one action, and the time of death is every moment, which shall fructify in the lives of others. And do not think of the fruit of action. Fare forward. O voyagers, O seamen, you who come to port, and you whose bodies will suffer the trial and judgment of the sea, or whatever event, this is your real destination. So Krishna, as when he admonished Arjuna on the field of battle, not farewell, but fare forward, voyagers. Finally, to own a poem like this at 3B, what was a time that the foreign was actually the gift, the wind of the South? I hope Emily's challenging you and delighting you. Thank you.